Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Galloway, and I am recording this lecture for you. It's for the fourth day of class, and it will be about audience adaptation. Just so you know, my daughter has been diagnosed with coronavirus, so unfortunately, we may need to be going asynchronous for a few days, but hopefully, we'll get everything to work out. We're going to talk about audience adaptation, we're going to watch some videos, and we're going to do a speech analysis. So to start, what I want you to do is I want you to watch these two video clips. So go ahead and pause what you're doing now and then watch these video clips, and when you come back I'll talk about them. So go ahead and pause this video and pull up these two video clips. Now these two video clips are from very different speeches. The first one is from what we would typically consider to be a persuasive speech, and the verbal delivery is very intense. The changes in voice are very strong, and it's a very forceful delivery. In addition, there's a great deal of physical delivery elements that are strong, that are sort of terse when they went and did them. And so we would have a very traditional persuasive speech. But the second speech is quite a bit different. And the second speech is a ceremonial speech that's designed primarily to be funny. So the verbal delivery is a lot less serious. The physical delivery is a lot more exaggerated than it would be in the past. And the speech content, obviously, is a lot less serious. So the question is, which of those speeches is a better speech? And the answer is that you can't use the same metric of evaluation for the two speeches. And what I mean by that is that they're different speeches, and therefore they need to be evaluated differently, and they need to be delivered differently. And so you can sort of think about, if you were going to give a persuasive speech that was very tough, how you would give that speech, as opposed to giving a speech that is a little less formal, a little more lighthearted. So we've talked before about why the listener is the key to the speech. The listener is who we want to get to do whatever we're doing in the speech. If it's an informative speech, then the listener is the one that we want to have get the content of the speech. If it's a persuasive speech, the listener is the one that we're trying to get to do whatever it is we want to do at the end of the speech. And even if it is a ceremonial speech, the listener is the one that is reacting to the speech. The listener is the one that laughs along with us. The listener is the one we're trying to build a bond of goodwill with. So the listener is the key to those speeches. Who the audience is affects the speech as a whole, and we'll talk about that in a demographic analysis in a little bit. But you can think for a second or two that if you were to give a speech to a group of kids at a daycare, that would be a lot different than giving a speech to a group of adults at a business meeting. And you need to think about how the audience is going to influence your speech. The goal with the audience is to build affinity with the audience. And let me define the word affinity for you for a minute. The word affinity means to be like someone. It's to build the idea that you are like the audience. Research indicates that people want to like people that are like them. They don't want to like someone that is better than them, that they think is smarter than them, that they think is richer than them. They want to instead be with someone who is like them. And so I always find it funny in political advertisements that you'll have wealthy multimillionaires trying to convince people in Iowa at a farm that they're just like them. And they go out and they eat some pie, or they eat some of the local cuisine, or they go to a fair and they try and determine who has the best corn dog, and yet they pretend that they're just like the audience, even though they're very different. And the reason why they're trying to be like the audience is because we like people that are like us. We like people who share similarities with us. We like people who like the same things that we like. and that's called building affinity. Another concept that we talked about on the second day of class is the frame of reference. Listeners have a deterministic screen where they filter information. Your life experiences, your 20 years or so of life on this world, have created a way in which you view things. And so you need to adapt to the listener's frame of reference. You need to understand that people are going to filter things through their life experiences. And so you want to build commonality with that audience. Perception is also selective, and what I mean by that is that people are only going to pay attention to certain things. We are bombarded by messages. We have a lot of different messages that come to us from different places. We listen to the radio. There are all kinds of conversations on campus. We're going to hear 21 people give a speech in this class, and we're not going to pay attention to all of those things. We only pay attention to things that are important to us. So as a speaker, you need to make your speech important to the audience. Another thing is that perception is egocentric. In other words, people listen to things that they think matter to them. We are very egocentric people. We're focused on ourselves. And if we think that a message is targeted towards us, if we think people are talking to us, then we're probably going to listen. But if we don't think that a message is targeted towards us, if we don't think it contains anything relevant for us, then we're probably not going to listen to that message. People come to the table with two things before they listen to a speech. The first thing they come to a table with is information. In your 20 years of life on this earth, you've learned a lot of different things. You have a bank of knowledge and information that you call upon whenever you're listening to a speech or a presentation. But you also have beliefs. You also have worldviews. And so one belief you might have is that the world is fundamentally fair, and that if you work hard and you play by the rules, that you'll succeed. Now, not everyone has that worldview. Some people have a worldview that life favors those who already have money, or life favors those of certain demographic characteristics, and it's the role of government to make it fair for everyone by perhaps redistributing wealth, by perhaps providing affirmative action for people who have been discriminated against in the past, etc. That's a worldview. To be honest, probably the worldview that is most significant to most of you all, it certainly is to me, is Christianity, is the idea that Jesus Christ came to earth to resolve our sins, and if we believe in him, that we shall not perish, but we will have eternal life. And that's our worldview, and that's how we view things. When we hear something or when we see something, we filter that information through our worldview. Well, as you can imagine, it's easier to change someone's knowledge than it is their belief system. So if I was to convince you, for example, to ban the death penalty, you may not have very much information about the death penalty. And so I could provide you with new information about the death penalty. I could say that no one in the United States who makes more than $100,000 a year has ever been put to death. I could say that the death penalty is racially discriminatory and that more African Americans and Hispanics are given the death penalty than white people are given the death penalty. And I would play to your belief that we want the world to be fair. And if we're doing something that is unfair, we ought not to do that. But imagine if I was to give a speech that challenged your belief system. So a long time ago, my father-in-law and I went to the Phillips Arena in Atlanta to watch the Atlanta Hawks play with the Dallas Mavericks. And this was when Dirk Nowitzki was a big basketball player, and my father-in-law really liked Dirk Nowitzki, so that's why we were there. And lo and behold, outside Phillips Arena was a real live communist protest. And I thought that these had gone away in the 60s, but this group of people was really advocating for a revolution for communism. And so my father-in-law and I were very intrigued by this. And so we went up to the woman who was kind of in charge of the protest, and she introduced herself, and her name was Liz. And I said, Liz, what if I agree with you on some things? Like, for example, you have a sign that says we should be spending more on health care than the war in Iraq. What if I'm with you on that, but I'm not with you on this whole we need to have a revolution and overthrow the government thing? And she thought we were making fun of her. And I said, honestly, if two people on this block are going to engage you on this question, you have found them. I am a debate coach. My father-in-law is a former debate coach. We are willing to engage you on your ideas. Well, my father-in-law mentioned that she should read the first book of Matthew, and I pointed out that maybe that wasn't the best scripture to read because that was the genealogy. But I did ask her, I said, what role does religion play in your movement? And she said, oh, you pretty much have to be an atheist to agree with me. And I said, good luck with that. Because 89% of Americans, the last time I checked this statistic, believe in a higher being. I didn't say they believe in a Christian God, and I didn't say they were Christians, but they do believe in a God of a sort. And so if you have to throw away your entire belief system to go along with something, that's very challenging for one speech. You instead want to do your best to align yourself with the belief system of someone and instead say, the knowledge I'm going to give you in this situation is consistent with your belief system. So instead of trying to convince you all, who I know because we're at a Christian university, many of you are Christian, it would be better for me to operate within your worldview than to try and get you to throw it all away, to try and get you to throw away 20 years of belief, than it is instead to try and operate within that system. When we think about an audience, we can think about certain characteristics that they have. One of them is age. Age is a primary determinant of attitude. Age is a primary determinant of what we want to do. So let's start for a second or two and think of our teeny tinies for a second or two. How would you give a speech to a group of 5-year-olds? Back before Corona hit and we were all in person for church, I used to volunteer with the preschool group, and we would provide them with a very basic lesson about the Bible. There would usually be a verse that was shortened for them to understand, but we would talk to them about the Bible, and we would have certain ways in which we talk to them. Well, you can think for a second or two of some different things you need to do. For one thing, you need to be a lot more energetic and enthusiastic with a group of 5-year-olds. For another thing, you need to be a lot less formal. You can get down on the ground with them. You can talk to them literally at their eye level. You can make entertaining jokes and things like that. You also need to keep in mind that kids are going to take you very literally. So my son was in the group one time, and I said that Jesus always has your back. And he looked at his back, and he looked at me very confused. What I needed to say was Jesus is always there for you. For you and I, we would understand that Jesus has your back means that he's always there for you. But for a child, they're going to take things very literally, and so they thought it meant something dealing with their back, and so it was very confusing. You also need to think about the fact that you really need to entertain these kids. So, for example, at our church, we had a craft for them to do, we had a coloring page for them to do, and of course, the key thing for any little kid is to have the snack. I knew when I was a little kid that maybe we ran around the field, maybe we played baseball, maybe we played football, maybe we played basketball. But gosh darn it, I was going to enjoy my snack. And I don't know what they put in Capri Suns, but it's like kid crack. The kids just love it. So you need to think, how am I going to keep my message, keep the core of my message that I want to give to little kids, but change the form in which I give the message to where it will be effective. But now let's talk about what we do for the other end of the spectrum. How do you talk to a group of 65-year-olds? Well, a lot of people might say something like, well, you need to talk loudly because they might have hearing aids or something like that. But I think elderly people in this country are looking for respect. I think, unlike a lot of cultures, the United States does not revere its elderly. It tends to diminish the elderly. It tends to think that they're hard of hearing and that they're not very smart and they need to be taken care of, as opposed to treating them like a source of wisdom and give a source of respect. So you might want to think about being more formal, saying sir, saying ma'am, providing respect. Elderly people tend to respect their country a lot more than younger people, so you may want to speak positively about the United States. And elderly people may need a little more help with certain things like technology, but you certainly don't want to insult them as you're doing it. So when you keep in mind older people, paying respect to them is a large part of the way in which you can align yourself with their values. The next part of a demographic analysis is gender, and we need to remember to be gender inclusive. It's easy to fall into stereotypes when you don't think you're making a particular stereotype. So sometimes when we talk about athletes, we assume that all athletes are male, when in fact I have a lot of really great female athletes that I have met at Sanford and that have been in my class here at Sanford, etc. We may make the assumption that women aren't the primary breadwinners for their family, when again, I've met a lot of women at Sanford who go on to do absolutely phenomenal things, that are high-powered attorneys, that are high-powered doctors, etc. I have 3 doctors in my life, and 2 of them are women. My primary care physician and my gastroenterologist, who takes care of my Crohn's disease, which is a gastrointestinal problem that can give me some severe pain in my stomach, and both of them are women. And in my experience, I've tended to like female doctors more than male doctors. And I think part of the reason why is that they're easier to talk to. I think the interpersonal skills of women, not because of anything inherent to being a woman, but because we raise women to be better communicators than men, means that it's easier for me to talk to female doctors. But we always need to be gender inclusive. And keep in mind, gender inclusive doesn't just mean men and women. It means being inclusive to all genders in the United States. And so we want to make sure that we don't alienate a group of people by falling prey to certain stereotypes about them, and we want to be as inclusive as possible. Then we talk about culture. Many of you have probably been on a missions trip abroad and know that it's important to keep in mind the certain cultural characteristics of a group of people. I mentioned to you that from the age of 6 to 8, I lived in Ankara, Turkey. My dad was in the Air Force, and he had a job in Turkey helping take care of the nuclear weapons, of all things, right on the front lines with the Soviet Union during the Cold War. But you needed to be aware of certain cultural backgrounds that the Turkish people had. One of them, for example, was I was a blonde, blue-eyed kid. Well, it was thought that Muhammad was blonde and blue-eyed, so I would frequently have people rub my head for good luck. It was also the case that You only looked one way when you crossed the street because Allah was going to look the other way. It was also the case that people didn't drink ice in their drinks, and you needed to be open to their point of view so that you could talk to them about important things. You can think in your own mind about various cultural things you needed to know before going on a missions trip. But you need to not alienate a person if you're going to get your message across. You need to be aware of how to talk to them. I talked to someone who went on a missions trip one time who the hymn, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God," was translated into the local language of "A mighty anthill is our God," which loses something in the affect when you think about it. But you need to make sure you are aware of certain customs so that you can get your message across. As far as religion goes, context is important. So if you're at church, I think it's great to assume that there's a Christian audience and that you can talk about religious messages. I feel pretty comfortable doing that here at Samford too, because it's a Christian university and I can assume that most of you listening to my message are Christians. When I was at the University of Georgia, however, and I was in a secular context, I felt a lot less comfortable talking about religion. I didn't make as many assumptions about the religion of the audience. You may encounter situations, and you probably will in the public sphere, where you shouldn't make the assumption that everyone is a Christian. And you may need to talk about things in a different way. You can't make the assumption that people have biblical knowledge. You can't make the assumption that they're going to know certain things when you talk to them. So you need to make sure to keep things in their proper context. Then there's group affiliation. What groups do people belong to? Well, a lot of you are Greek, so I clearly wouldn't want to do anything to alienate fraternities or sororities. Another thing is if I'm talking to a group of people, like a missions group, or like a group of young Democrats or young Republicans, I would want to talk to them about things specific to what they do. I would want to research their group. I would want to research what they believed in so I could make my message more effective. But those are traits of a demographic analysis. But you also want to think about your situation. When you are giving a speech in front of a large group of people, you should be more formal. When you narrow the audience down, you think about our class, about 20 people in the class, I can talk to individuals in the class, I can include you in the conversation more easily, and then you think of narrowing it down to a small group or even a one-on-one communication, and there's going to be a lot of discussion about the person themselves. Plus, size is going to affect channel choices. If I talk to you in the right center, I would want to make sure that I had a microphone so that everyone could hear me. It affects visual aid choices. So if you were to talk in the right center, you might want to broadcast something on the screen up above. I use the PowerPoint in our class to make it more effective for visual learners. You also need to think about time and space considerations, the time of day, the length of time you have to give a speech, and where the speech is going to take place. When you can, you should try and know these things in advance. The more you know in advance, the better you can prepare for your speech. Is PowerPoint going to be available? Is the room conducive to PowerPoint? How large is the room you're talking to? Therefore, you can know to ask for things like, do I need a microphone? Will I need a projector? Etc. When you can, you should also have a high-tech and a low-tech option. Technology is a tricky beast. Sometimes it doesn't work very well. It took me a little while, even today, to find a way to give this speech to you today because I was struggling with Canvas conferences. And so you need to be flexible in your technology choices. And the best thing to do is ask questions in advance. Email someone, call them, ask questions in advance. And if the environment is bad, I've spoken in some hot rooms before, I've spoken in some small rooms before, I've spoken in some rooms where the technology isn't very good. You need to convey enthusiasm and that you're happy to be there. You also should research your audience. One of the ways you can research your audience is to just talk to them. If it's a group of people you're familiar with, you can observe and have conversations with them. I've been teaching Sanford at 16 years now, and so I know some of what Sanford students think. I don't want to say I'm an expert. Clearly, you all know your own group more than I do, but I've learned a lot about things that Sanford students think to be important. You can also research specific people. If someone is interviewing you, you should know about them. When I was at the University of Georgia, one of the great things that we learned was how to do job interviews. And if you were going to be interviewed by someone, you should read something that they have written, or you should know about their profile online. Before I came to my job interview at Sanford, I read one article from everyone who would be interviewing me. So I would have something to talk to them about, and I could show respect to them. People are going to have home pages, they're going to have articles written about them. Make sure you look at those. I'm not saying that you need to Google stalk someone, but it is a good idea to know something about them. When you are planning your speech, you should go through feed forward or adapting in advance. Feed forward is the process of anticipating audience feedback. So you ought to think, how are people going to respond when I talk about this? How are people going to respond to this message? We were interviewing someone who held the job before Dr. George did, and they were giving a speech about in and out groups. They were giving their research presentation to the faculty. And I said, oh, if they only talked about Alabama fans and Auburn fans, everyone in the room would get it. And so you need to think to yourself, what is going to make something stick for a given audience? So come up with different examples and come up with different analogies for how things work. And you can think about what's going to work for a 5-year-old, what's going to work for a 65-year-old, what's going to work for a middle-aged couple. All of those things could be very different. Your goal is to be like the audience. The way to get the audience to like you is to be like them, to share similar experiences, to think about the things that you have in common with other people. You also need to think, how am I going to adapt during the speech? And so you need to adapt to feedback. I know we were talking in the class last time about how that means I need to be looking up at you. I need to have good eye contact. And I need to not have my speech scripted so that if part of my speech is confusing, I can go over it a little bit more. And if people already understand a component of my speech, then we don't have to go over it as much. Keep an eye on the audience. You should always be looking up at the audience and try and think like they do. Are they happy to be there? Is it warm outside? Is it too hot in the room? Try and think the way the audience does. Now I want you to watch this speech and find out whether or not you think the adaptations of this speaker are effective or ineffective. And then the next time we have class together, we'll go ahead and talk about this. But thanks for hanging in there with me. And if you don't mind, I would really appreciate it if you gave my daughter some of your thoughts and prayers, because she's an 11-year-old kid and she's been diagnosed with both the flu and COVID, And you can imagine how scary that must be for her. So thank you so much.